Welcome our Revolution NOLA membership. My name is David Alvarez, here, member of the steering committee. We have interviewed the 4 candidates for the House Representatives District 93 open seat that's coming up for election on March the 24th. Please listen to the answers and decide whom best represents your best interests and whom may be our voice in the state House of Representatives to help open the door for progressive policies and lawmaking that's going to help and improve our quality of life. Once again, listen to the questions, make that vote. Thank you very much. All right, well, I'd like to welcome Dan Faust, a candidate for District 93. Dan, thank you so much for joining us and speaking to our membership.
Thank you for having me.
We're going to get started real quick. We're going to get started. Our first question is about ballot initiatives. Would you be willing to support or champion a constitutional amendment to allow or expand petition-motivated ballot initiatives? By this we mean the ability for Louisiana residents, to actually provide input into a ballot through referendum. Currently, we can't do that.
Absolutely. Ballot initiatives are really something that needs to happen. Too many times, the council or various agencies will go ahead and pass legislation that is unpopular, and the citizens absolutely need a way to alter any form of legislation. I know that there are ballot initiatives that you can do with over 10,000 voters, and I think organizations should be able to communicate and pass that, because there are a lot of nonprofits out here who do very good work with the community, and they've been fighting for several different issues, and they have been unable to get the voice or the presence that they needed. And by putting these issues on the ballot and taking it directly to the voter, you create a better democracy for everybody. So I would absolutely champion that.
All right, good. Let's talk a little bit about home rule. The state gives control of local policies to local governments. However, whenever the state seems justified, it will preempt a local community's ability to govern itself. So let's say, for example, a local community wants to institute a minimum wage. They could be preempted by state legislature and not allowed to establish such a number. Will you support the rolling back or the return of power to local municipalities, and if so, how?
Well, in terms of setting their own minimum wages, that should absolutely be done on an area-by-area basis. Not one minimum wage works for every single different district. Obviously, we have higher housing costs here in Orleans Parish, and an inability to set a local minimum wage has very greatly hurt the community as a whole. In addition, there are certain aspects in which Orleans Parish has unique control over certain things, like the energy system and its local utilities. In that case, I also believe that the communities as a whole should have a greater say into how those are managed. But when it comes to setting their own policies, not everything works for every location in Louisiana. There are different locations that have different needs. You have greater metropolitan areas in Orleans Parish and in Baton Rouge, and compared to someplace like Slidell. So obviously I'd worry mainly about Orleans Parish. But yes, our ability to set a minimum wage is something that needs to happen.
Let's talk about criminal justice. State initiative to end cash bail is something we've been discussing. Cash bail, in which an accused must offer money as surety for appearance at trial, effectively means that the majority of people living paycheck to paycheck are pretty much sentenced to long waits in jail because they can't come up with the money to get out of jail while they're waiting for their trials. Do you support, or further, would you champion a bill that would end cash bails for minor offenses here in the state?
Yes, absolutely. let's face it, with all the information that's coming out right now with the CIA funded Palantir program, which is had a hot list of over 3,000 people on it, which were targeted to be watched because they were high risk of violence. You were creating a police state in effect. And so certain people were getting busted for offenses where it might necessarily have been bad at all. You have a problem in the way that certain portions of the population, let's just say it, black men, are targeted by police because of general descriptions or just a general tendency to police in certain areas, such as the program was giving to the NOPD directly. So, yes, we have to take care of this. Too many people are staying in the Orleans Parish Prison for too long. And many times these are actually juveniles. In the case of Jaquin Thomas, he was there for over 30 days and he ended up hanging himself, and he had been beaten just a week before. So we need to reform how the bail process is. We have to make sure that there's safety in place for juveniles, and we have to make sure our parish defender's office is fully funded. I mean, they have a minuscule budget as it is at 2.1 million, and we're arguing about funding them at 1.5 million. I mean, if you want to talk about zoning restrictions and how the state tells certain areas how they have to manage their money, let's look at the convention center. I mean, we have a whole pot of money that's sitting there on the side while critical services are being underfunded. This needs to stop. And we need to pay attention to the local population and the youth that we are severely cracking down upon and violating their rights with programs.
What about your support of decriminalization or legalization of recreational cannabis? What is your stance on that?
Oh, heck yeah. Come on now. I mean, even the mayor had her husband drop a joint inside one of the courts. It's popular, it makes money, it can fund education, and even in some instances, there's been evidence that it decreases usage among the youth. You know, and if it's paying for education, that's what it should be for. Then who cares? I mean, if just smoking a little bit of weed can go ahead and put kids in good schools and pay teachers properly, rather than just a few administrators getting all the pay, but actually pay teachers for all of the struggle that they have to do, let everybody smoke weed then. And it's bound to boost tourism down here. I mean, everybody comes to New Orleans anyways. It's a bohemian city. Of course, let people smoke weed in the quarter. You're not going to be cracking down on young black youth who are going to go ahead and use marijuana if they choose to. And at the same time, it's a victimless offense. If it's not hurting anybody, if it's not hurting children, and can it actually help the children learn, it's a win-win.
What is your stance regarding if and when legalization does happen, that the state legislature formally releases prisoners or establishes reparations for individuals who have received felony charges in the past for marijuana? What is your stance on those types of
You're darn skippy. I mean, the programs would have to be designed, but their records should be absolutely expunged. They should be released. I mean, usually a lot of the crimes are based off of, they'll bust them for possession, but they were really after them for something else. And in the case of one gentleman just recently who had spent 13 years in prison because of simple possession, that has to end. And he should get reparations. That's a huge chunk of his life that was taken away. And granted, the state's poor, and we already have a backlog of judgments that the city needs to pay. So how would people actually be paid? Well, let's start looking at a lot of these blighted properties, at a lot of other ways to properly train them, put them in the workforce, make sure that they get a holistic compensation rather than a payment which may or may not have a check in the mail for you.
This next question about the Sewage and Water Board. What would a more accountable structure for the Sewage and Water Board look like, in your opinion? What would be your solution to making Sewage and Water Board more accountable and improve? And it's a pretty poor track record thus far.
you should really bring in experts in the community, people who have worked on this issue. The sewage and water board as a whole has been a downplayed story. And in fact, the People's Assembly had a legal case against them earlier today that I wanted to go to, but I'm going to find out about as soon as I can. It is a Ponzi scheme that is waiting to collapse. 34% of the total amount of debt of Orleans Parish is for the Sewage and Water Board, and over $300 million of the debt that was raised has been sitting in the Board of Liquidation accounts. So literally they have money to fix services and they have not. We need better accountability. We also need the full story. 2002, Catherine Moraldo was indicted by the FBI because of taking bribes from Aqua Alliance. This is the FBI release. It also included several different individuals: Michael Stump, William Gottenstrader, H. Grant Simmons, former executive of PSG. PSG was also US Filter, was also Veolia Water. These were individuals that were grouped in with contracting with the Sewage and Water Board. And Catherine Moraldo was one of the senior Sewage and Water Board members. She had been in place since 1993. On top of that, she had been busted of corruption over a set period of 8 years, going back to the beginning. You also have Benjamin Edwards in 2009, who was a long-time, over 30 years, senior member of the Sewage and Water Board. He, in fact, had formed a company that was supposed to perform contracts that never got performed. He also was convicted of embezzling funds through a church to make sure all the profits from the company that he got from the Sewage and Water Board went through a church, so it was tax-free. Both he and his brother were busted. He had been on the Sewage and Water Board for a long period of time, and he was busted of this corruption. Why hasn't this been released? What it shows is that there is a long history that the Sewage and Water Board has been used to manipulate property values and has been used as a cash cow. One of the senior project engineers for the Sewage and Water Board said on the August 5th that in fact none of the drains catch basins had ever been cleaned beforehand. Stacey Head has mentioned multiple times that the funds kept sitting in the account year after year after year. The problem was it was routed through certain companies. And in fact, our Sewage and Water Board has constantly been under attack since 1993 by various groups that have been trying to privatize. There was a major privatization effort back in 2001 to 2003 that involved Veolia Water, involved OMI Thames, and CH2M Hill. These are still companies that operate in the area. These are still companies that perform contracts. The Sewage and Water Board has not had its full story told, and it needs to be told.
Okay. Now, moving along, let's talk about education a little bit and health and hospitals in particular. In Louisiana, we have an exceptionally high rate of sexually transmitted diseases, being ranked second in the nation from those surveyed by a 2016 CDC report. We also have an inability to ask our children questions about their sexuality directly at the schools where state law doesn't allow for for children at the school level to be asked directly about their sexual activities. What would you do as state legislature to address the issues that we have currently with sexually transmitted infections in our state and the lack of robust sex education in our schools?
If you want federal tax dollars, you should be teaching about sex education. The simple fact is that everybody does it. So not teaching about it is kind of like putting on a blindfold and hoping for the best outcome. I don't even know the statistics, but I'm sure we have a very high rate of teenage pregnancy. With the amount of STDs, our HIV epidemic that we have locally, our sickle cell epidemic that we have locally as well, we need this type of education. We need the risks to be taught to children at a young age. I mean, I'm also quoted at the Orleans Parish Republican Executive Committee. I said that we should have sex ed and gun ed at the same time, which is early on in a child's youth. Whatever that may mean, but the fact is we need this type of education. These are dangers. An unprotected sex is still going to put a person's life at risk, especially if they don't know enough to be tested. We should have better public testing procedures. We should have better awareness. There should be STD testing drives, in fact, because if there is a high rate of HIV in the community, it means a lot of people are having unprotected sex and they don't even know that they're HIV positive.
Okay. Due to multiple factors, including disparities in prenatal care, in Louisiana, black women are 1.8 times to 3.4 times more likely to die of a pregnancy-associated or pregnancy-related cause than for white women. What can be done, in your opinion, as a legislature in the State House to improve maternal health and patient outcomes for women of color?
In all honesty, I would love to see a form of universal health care arise in Louisiana. We have a very underserved population and we have a very bloated budget in terms of federal dollars. The majority of funding for the state of Louisiana is actually federal dollars. We need to take a look at the tax exemptions for inventory credits or industrial tax exemptions, and we need to start putting that into healthcare, into education. And universal education and universal healthcare should definitely be the case in a state that is as resource rich as Louisiana. We have a small portion of the community, 1% or so, that gets the vast majority of the profits in this state. This is one of the richest cities in the country in terms of top wealth, yet we have the highest rate of poverty within the country. That has to change. And it's not just Orleans Parish as a whole. We're talking about outlying parishes. We also have a problem with water infrastructure. Without clean water, you're going to have more rates of infectious diseases, of medical complications. Our water infrastructure is something that also needs to be maintained. So Louisiana has a lot of problems, but universal health care is something that needs to happen right away, especially when it comes for sexual education, our HIV rate. Just generally accessing and providing the community with this healthcare, since in a right to work state we don't always get healthcare plans. It needs to be a priority.
Okay.
And childcare too, by the way.
Let's talk about the environment and renewable energy. Seeing that job growth in solar is outpacing oil and coal and is now the fastest growth industry worldwide and in the United States, what will you do to help us reclaim the title of #1 solar city in the country like we were in 2015 when we had the Louisiana Solar State tax credits?
Everything for me is a focus on jobs and solar. Renewable energy is easily the quickest way to employ as much of our community as possible. And we have to look at the true nature of unemployment in Orleans Parish. If 50% of black men are unemployed, 30% of Orleans Parish population are black men, then you have at least 15% of the population of this parish unemployed. That has to stop. The training programs are 3 to 6 months or even shorter. It doesn't take a lot of skill or education to learn how to tile a roof or to install these panels. It needs to be an immediate drive. Instead of spending $200 million for a natural gas plant, which may eventually employ 18 to 20 people on a long-term basis, by roofing the communities, the whole homes that we have, where over 91% of these homes are solar panel capable. If you look on a website called Project Google Sunroof, and it's Project Sunroof, and it has a lot of information on how many homes locally are solar capable. 91% of homes and structures in Orleans Parish can have solar panels installed. This should be done immediately. We could train the workforce immediately. Free training, on-the-job training, and put the community to work immediately. And these jobs aren't just short-term jobs. These are long-term jobs. And overall, as a whole, what Orleans Parish should really focus on is becoming an energy storage center because of our unique position on the Mississippi River. We have a huge gulf out there where we can be installing huge wind turbines. And by installing these wind turbines, you bring in manufacturing jobs. By installing these turbines, you bring in electrical jobs where you have to wire the whole coast. So you should have a whole system of batteries set up to store all of this offshore energy. And that should be the drive for Louisiana as a whole, because you can create, and there's a group called 100 Is Now or Solutions Project that have done the initial analysis on this. You can employ over 300,000 people in Louisiana to start producing this offshore energy and remove our reliance on fossil fuels. We can still drill. Let's not destroy the jobs that we have, but at the same time, let's prepare for the future and prepare by putting the people to work. Texas is the leader in wind energy in the United States. If Texas and Louisiana are sister states, why is this not occurring here? This needs to occur, and it needs to occur now because we need the jobs now. And we can see that almost every day when we read the news, and we know it's young black youth out there with no employment opportunities because there's only so many service industry jobs that will hire people with tattoos. There's only so many service industry jobs that aren't going to like a certain appearance in the front of the house, and there's only so many jobs in the back of the house. So solar energy is a job situation, not just a environment situation.
Okay. It is a harsh reality, but oil and gas companies hold a lot of influence over politicians in the state of Louisiana. How will you fight to hold the oil companies accountable and protect our vulnerable coastline?
There are several methods. One, we need to do an itemization of the dedicated budget in Louisiana. We need to find out exactly how many tax breaks and exemptions are going to certain industrial companies. Because not all companies are bad out there. There are a lot that are actually producing jobs, that are properly paying their employees and taking care of their employees. But that's not the case. I mean, even locally, you'll have certain companies like Folgers gets a lot of money for tax exemptions for jobs creation, but they create jobs. But a group such as Entergy has received over $13 million in the past several years for jobs creation, but they've had negative jobs growth. In fact, they haven't had any. So you're finding that certain actors will take large benefits and they keep those benefits through lobbyists. They keep those benefits through hoping that a legislator doesn't understand how to read a spreadsheet and break down a per ratio before tax and after tax actual credits and find out what rates of taxes some of these corporations are paying, because not all of them are paying the same rates. Even 2 years ago, Sue Lincoln had noticed an incident where an oil lobbyist had given a piece of legislation to a legislator. And one of the Democrats, and I'm not sure who, actually called out, "We have a right to know what we're voting on. Can you tell us what's in the bill?" And the other legislator responded by, "Well, if I told you, I'd have to kill you. Ha ha ha. No, really, it's beneficial for the oil and gas industry. And it takes care of our friends." And that's what's happening right now. Nobody's, per se, even questioning where some of these tax dedications go or questioning some of these spot changes to legislation, because they don't have to do it all at once. They can write a bill and then just do a spot change in a different session. And people aren't keeping track of where the money's going. And the best way to take care of people as a whole is to find out where this money's going and make sure they pay. Another thing we need to do is reform campaign finance. LLCs, corporations have no business donating to legislators. It should no longer have the choice of bundling all these donations as well. So if one individual owns 5 different companies, they can donate the max to each of these politicians. They shouldn't have $2,000 buffets available every day for lunch, when just the other day our state legislature gavelled in an hour and a half late and then go ahead and gavel out right away and go across the aisle, go to lunch, and hear from lobbyists what they should be passing for this tax bill. I mean, is it any wonder why there's so much confusion? Different lobbyists are pulling different legislatures each way, and the only people that are being told are going to get cuts are the taxpayers. You know, the taxpayers are paying higher rates than some of these corporations. Sorry, my voice getting hoarse.
This is a yes or no question, and yeah, I know you're familiar with this. Do you support or would you champion a state resolution to formally call for a limited amendment convention under the Article 5 of the Constitution to limit the corruptive influence of money in elections?
I think I just answered that, but yes, absolutely.
That'd be.
In fact, the best thing that I've seen so far is out in Seattle, they have a campaign called Honest Elections, which is public financing of campaigns. Maybe we should start looking into funding that program because, you know, in certain campaigns you have certain candidates which receive a lot of money from a lot of lobbyists, but they pay other people to go knock on doors. You know, they pay for certain endorsements which come with a group of organizers who automatically will knock on doors for you rather than certain genuine people. So, you know, we have to take a look at how our state reps are getting funded. If I was to have an incentive to knock on each person's door and say they could give me like a $5 certificate to be managed and spent only on certain materials, you know, or certain companies that produce these materials so it benefits the community as a whole and keeps putting the dollars in. That should be done. And eliminating the influence of big business is why we haven't, not limiting the influence of big business is why we're stuck. Why we're stuck in this situation where the people suffer.
Okay. Let's talk about prison reform. The use of prisoners for labor is exceptionally pronounced in the South, which has echoes of the plantation system. What policies would you support that would ban or otherwise curtail prison labor in our state?
I would stop immediately all these programs. I mean, we have to take a look at, first of all, if they're doing labor, they should be paid properly. I mean, if you're going to go ahead and put them to work, pay them properly. No longer should certain individuals who have contracts with a prison get nice fat bonuses off of basically the back of the common man. I mean, mainly black men, obviously, mainly Hispanic, but within Louisiana, it's almost virtually all black men, but there are white men too. It's basically poor people. It's indentured servitude. And then they're, on top of that, they're mistreated the entire time. Then when they've worked all these years to do this prison labor, they kick them out with just a couple of pennies on a check while they're charging them exorbitant amounts in their local commissary just to pay for basic toiletry items. And this isn't right. If you're going to work them, pay them properly. And those profits, the money for the contracts, shouldn't go into the pockets of legislators or the state. It should go into the pockets of the people who are doing the work. They're paying their time, they're doing the crime, but not being free is already a bad enough punishment. Free labor shouldn't be part of that.
Okay. Gun control. What level of gun control do you support with respect to actual policies at a state level?
I don't believe in assault weapons or assault rifle ban. I am former military, 1st Cavalry Division. I was a medic. I mean, I don't have an assault rifle myself, but I have plenty of friends with assault rifles. I understand the feeling and the worries on people carrying these weapons around. And like incidents that happened at Jeff Davis where there were a bunch of individuals who did have assault rifles out there that should have never happened. That was near a school. That was near a bar. That should have never occurred. They should have not been armed while they were in a public park like that. But at the same time, there's a lot of people out there who are former military who, if you go for their guns, they will riot and revolt. Can we take them all? No. But can we mandate that there's mental health checks? Yes. Can we mandate training? Absolutely. Training as early as possible. If you can't drive, you can't have a gun. I mean, you're looking at the free market already start answering a lot of these questions. They're voluntarily limiting the sale age to 21. Nobody was even asking for that. They were asking for a ban, but stores said, hey, 21. Trump's even saying confiscate weapons, which is throwing up a lot of red flags everywhere, especially to me, and especially to people who believe that he's a fascist dictator. I mean, if you're calling him a fascist, this is a move of fascism. So you kind of have to worry what you get sometimes. But mental health checks, licensing, a federal registry, a renewal period, just like a driver's license, maybe even more with new purchases. I mean, if somebody's going in and purchasing $2,000 worth of rifles and ammunition, there might need to be a waiting period. They shouldn't be able to do that right away. Close the gun store loophole. There's no reason why there shouldn't be a full background check and a prior mental health check before you're just handing someone a rifle because they drove out to the middle of nowhere to sit at a gun show. Yeah, it might kind of it's an inconvenience for some of the like the retailers, but hey, this is a day and age of free 2-day shipping with Amazon. They can ship these items very easily, and that creates an actual trackable address. We need common sense restrictions. Am I for outright bans? Not everywhere. In certain areas like public parks, the French Quarter where it's going to be crowded, any parades or second lines, absolutely. You need to make sure that these aren't really cheap licenses to get to. They need the training, they need the waiting period, they need the mental health checks. This has to be done.
So all of those are for all guns or just for assault rifles?
Assault rifles, handguns. Yeah, there should be a licensing restriction. But the truth of the matter in this day and age with 3D printers is you can get a $300 3D printer, and if you go on tour, you can download the schematics and print yourself out a 2-shot pistol. That's plastic that won't check any metal detectors. This is our day and age now. This is the day and age where the schematics are out there to build pipe weapons, where they are 1-shot capacity but can still kill a person. You're still going to have tons and tons of handguns out there. Handguns, it's almost at the point where you're not going to be able to stop it, but I do believe in mandatory training for that as well. And there should be mandatory mental health checks. There should be mandatory mental health checks for driving a vehicle these days. We have a mental health problem in the States. We also have an ideology problem. And we do have an extremist religion problem. And by extremist religion problem, I'm not talking about Islam. I'm talking about a different religion.
Okay, Dan, well, thank you so much. I want to give you the floor now so you can address the membership and tell them about yourself and your candidacy.
All right, so some of you know me, some of you don't know me. Some of you seen me, some have seen me fighting for the right things, some see me having stood up for things that you don't believe in. So many times I was told that you have to be on our side or their side, or this side or that side. I mean, even right now in this election, you can see that everybody's lining up on a certain side. And I'm the little guy who's basically throwing pebbles at a Goliath. And that Goliath is the political infrastructure here. And no matter what you may think of me, you know that I am an authentic individual, that I have been out there fighting for the causes, that I have never been a hypocrite, that I have never shied down from the truth, that I have never been willing to answer any questions about my past or what I've done. But I've also been out there breaking up fights. I've also been out there protecting all the people protesting. I was there at the anti-Trump protests. I was there for every single monument removal. I was there every single time we had a no Muslim ban march. We had a women's march. We had the J20 marches. We had the second lines that were like the funeral for the Statue of Liberty. The moment after Trump got sworn in the inauguration, I have been there fighting with the people. When the Sewage and Water Board broke down, I was there talking about the nature of their debt and their corporate structure and the history of corruption with that organization. And I have been the person yelling and advocating at city council when it came to things like stopping a jail expansion, making sure that the ferry terminal expansion actually had a covered bridge and actually had protection for individuals, advocating for public transit with groups like Ride New Orleans. And I always did this on my own if I didn't have people working with me. And I did it because I want NOLA to be NOLA again. I want this to be a city where everybody's happy, where everybody can go to a second line without having to worry about an individual driving a car in or an individual shooting off because of gang violence because they know they have the police diverted and they're not paying attention. I want a New Orleans where there's health care and actual worry about the constituents who work in the service industry, who work 40, 60, 70, 80 hours a week, because I'm one of them. I gave up my career to be in this city. There were no options for a mathematician who worked as a financial analyst. There was only service industry. And so that's where I went, where the most amazing people in the world keep a party going nonstop. And some of those people die because of the lack of care that these administrations that span way, way back have treated them. And it's not just the service industry, it's the African American community as a whole. How is it that 50% of black men are still unemployed? This is a humanitarian crisis. This is a national security crisis, even. These people need to be put to work. These individuals who have been constantly denigrated, pushed to the side. You can see them camping out every night at St. Charles. You can see them camping out underneath the bridge at Canal Street with the I-10 underpass. And it's everybody. You're not going to hear the status quo ever say names like the Sewage and Water Board, Veolia, Entergy is using tax credits. You're never going to hear anybody call them out because that's the people that they get money from. And you have to understand that as long as the corporation pays the politician to get elected, you're never going to have real representation because you don't want to piss off a potential donor. I finance this every campaign, pretty much, except for maybe $100 on my own dime. Because if I succeed, I make it able for everybody else to succeed. Because there are many, many good people out there who should have been running for office, who should have been running for city council. No women ran in my race. That's horrible. A woman had been in that seat for 8 years almost, and no woman ran in my race. She would have won easily with the demographics. Why not? I know a lot of good women who could have run. More people need to step up and run for office because you know what's right. You're not afraid to call out what's wrong. So don't get bought into the system. Don't listen to them when they tell you you have to wait your turn. Fight for it. Run for office next year. All of the state legislatures, so many positions are going to be open for office. You have to run. Anybody who's a member of our revolution should sit and severely think about if they can do this, because the change is going to come from the people. It's not going to come from the people who have been working for this committee or this committee is related to this person or this person. It's going to come from the people who are coming to this city and out there marching in the streets, not from somebody doing spot zone legislation in an office. Not for somebody who's being paid to represent you. Somebody who's representing you because they love this city and wants to see the people of this city succeed. We don't want to have our soul eaten away by tourists and people who cater for tourists. So please, even if you don't support me, support yourself and run for office, because this city has been an abused lover who has been mistreated by her political class for far too long. And it needs to end. And the change Might not come with me, but it might come with you. So thank you. danfaust.com, number 7 on the ballot, blah, blah, blah.
Thank you, Dan.